United Kingdom. Joining us to discuss that, Professor Capri Cafaro, a political analyst and former Ohio State Senator, and Professor Scott Lucas from International Politics Department at the University of Birmingham. It'll all settle down in a minute if we just keep talking. I find that
absolutely
that often works. Welcome both. A very busy and fascinating few days for you, no doubt, and it's wonderful to be able to have you here to get this get your American perspective. First of all, Scott, how would you characterise the special relationship before this visit?
Well, it's always been a bit of a myth. I mean, my parents back in Alabama, they only know Benny Hill, the comedian from way back in the Queen, that's it. But it's been, on the one hand, for, I think, the British, a convenient myth at times, because it helps the idea we're still a power, we're still involved, you know, during the Cold War and afterwards. And then for America, it's quite often been a relationship of convenience. So, for example, in the First and Second Gulf Wars, America needed Britain in a coalition of willing, so then we became great friends. Ronald Reagan needed Margaret Thatcher in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, so build up the relationship. I do think there's a real relationship that has built up since 1945 between agencies, the militaries, the intelligence services, the State Department and Foreign Office, but here's the twist with Donald Trump. He doesn't have that relationship. He doesn't have that alliance. Donald Trump is closer to Vladimir Putin than he is to our special relationship now.
And Capri, he did actually say, I'm probably going to have an easier time when I see Helsinki than anybody else. How much of this then is down to the fact that what we're dealing with a president who primarily is a businessman or a TV star, rather than a career politician and diplomat?
Well, I think that, you know, first off, understand, you know, contextually, I think one of the reasons that President Trump won the election is because there was a great deal of the American public that was interested in shaking up the traditional political system. That being said, I think, you know, to your point, you know, whether it's the special relationship with the United Kingdom or our relationship with mainland Europe, the post-World War II alliances that were built are really being questioned right now. We've seen that as exhibited through the conversations that have occurred just recently in the NATO summit. We've seen it in the G7. We've seen it in, you know, the tariffs that have been levied from, you know, the United States under the auspice of national security, which is a very thin, to say the least, reasoning.
If the special relationship, which is the most special, President Trump has said today, or possibly even inventing a new word in the process, talk about the interview? If it's not special but it is about convenience, Capri, how is that relationship going to be affected by what we've seen in the last couple of days? This criticism of the Brexit deal, and he says if you proceed with that, you're not getting a trade deal with us, and then saying, oh, Theresa May's a marvellous.
What's happening here is that, you know, the strains are really happening abroad, not domestically. I think President Trump oftentimes plays to more of a domestic audience with his rhetoric. And so I think here, you know, when he says things like, well, Boris Johnson would be a great prime minister, and, you know, if you're going to have a soft Brexit, then we're not going to have a bilateral trade agreement. Those things sometimes play well with the base in the United States, but obviously give pause to individuals and within the institutions here in the United Kingdom and across the EU. So there's no question that we are in a period of turmoil, strain, and a lot of questions surrounding our historical relationship.
What's his game plan then here then, Scott? You know, why would he say one thing one day and one thing another? I mean, it certainly keeps everybody guessing, and everyone around him seems to sort of keep being diplomatic and polite.
It's a combination of two very unprecedented things. Now, the one we quite often talk about is Trump is unpredictable. He has a very loose relationship with the truth. He is manipulative. But here's, I think, there's something we need to go beyond it, because he may talk about the specialist relationship to kind of say, oh, it's all okay. This is actually part of a plan which is being developed by advisors who are working with Trump. And the game plan here, which we saw at NATO and which we have seen here, is that they don't really like multilateral institutions. They don't like NATO. They do not like the European Union. And specifically what happened with the Sun interview, which triggered this off, is that they were using Theresa May to get at breaking up the European Union. And the idea being, you choose the European Union or you choose us. And the reason why I say that, because, you know, a lot of people may not pick up on this, is that the person who was very influential with Donald Trump on this from the start of the administration was a man named Steve Bannon, who was his chief strategist in the White House and who has been in London this week.
But Vladimir Putin's not that keen on the EU either.
Exactly right. And the Russians have
Nor
been able...
NATO, for that
nor
matter.
NATO. And the Russians have been able to basically exploit both Trump's unpredictability and his advisors who share that sentiments about NATO to turn this 1945 system on its head now. I honestly think this is the greatest challenge, might even say crisis, for the US, the UK, and Europe since World War II.
And NATO and the United Nations and any kind of multilateral organization.
So how are those organisations meant to respond then if they don't want to suffer fractures as a result of an America First view?
Sure.
President
Well,
Trump has always been frank about wanting to.
That's right.
To promote.
And again, I think that, so much of President Trump's strategy is about playing to a domestic audience and fulfilling campaign promises at all costs. So you have that. I actually have a little bit of a different view in regards to President Trump and his advisors. I actually think he's pretty unilateral in the way that he approaches things. And, a lot of the reports coming out of the United States are basically saying that, historic folks within the Pentagon, those that are, career individuals inside the Pentagon and the State Department are essentially trying to do cleanup on NATO in particular after, the things that happened just recently in Brussels. So there is, I think, a challenge because there is a disconnect between what President Trump says personally and then sometimes what career diplomats and others within the United States government actually say. So it's hard for our allies or adversaries to really understand where we're coming from.
I would kind of add to that what I'm saying is that you've got certain advisors around Trump. We could identify as Stephen Miller, Peter Navarro, and it's that coterie of White House advisors who are basically proteges of Steve Bannon, who have been against the Pentagon, who have been against the State Department. And do you know where Steve Bannon has been all week? He's been in London with an operations room talking to people like, well, there's a certain British politician who used to lead a party who's very close.
And several newspapers.
Exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. Professor Capri Cafaro and Professor Scott Lucas from the University of Birmingham, thank you both for coming here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counter-terrorism detectives investigating the contamination of 2 people by the nerve agent Novichok believe they have found the source of the substance. Dawn Sturgis died in hospital on Sunday after being exposed to the agent. Her partner, Charlie Rowley, remains in a serious condition in hospital. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has the latest from Amesbury.
Well, the news that they found this bottle